What if I told you that somewhere in the back streets of Prague, there once existed a restaurant where the chef could cook the exact meal you dreamed about last night? Not just any meal, but that specific dish that haunted your sleep, complete with flavors you'd never tasted in waking life. Textures that shouldn't exist, and ingredients that defied all culinary logic. The establishment was called Oneros, named after the Greek personification of dreams, and for exactly 17 months between 1943 and 1944, it served what witnesses described as impossible food to customers who never remembered choosing to eat there. But here's where the story takes a disturbing turn. Everyone who ate at Oneros reported the same phenomenon. The dreams came back, not just came back, but intensified, expanded, and began bleeding into their waking hours. And the more they ate, the clearer these dreams became, until the line between sleeping and waking dissolved entirely. This is the story of a restaurant that shouldn't have existed, serving food that couldn't be real, to customers who may never have left. In the winter of 1943, Prague was a city under occupation, where curfews and rations had reduced most meals to tasteless necessities. Food was scarce, joy was scarcer, and dreams had become the only escape from the grinding reality of war. It was in this context that Helena Morovkova, a former neurologist turned underground resistance member, made a discovery that would change everything. Helena had been studying the effects of extreme stress on sleep patterns among her fellow resistance fighters when she noticed something peculiar. Under intense psychological pressure, people weren't just having more vivid dreams. They were dreaming about food with impossible accuracy. Not just any food, but specific dishes with precise flavors, textures, and even temperatures that they described in identical detail, despite never having shared their dreams with others. What Helena discovered next defied medical explanation. She found that certain combinations of herbs, when prepared in specific ratios and consumed before sleep, could not only induce these hyper-realistic food dreams, but also allow the dreamer to retain perfect sensory memory of taste and smell upon waking. But Helena's experiments went further than anyone imagined. Working in secret, she began documenting these dream recipes, transcribing the impossible dishes described by her subjects. Meals that combined flavors that shouldn't work together yet created perfect harmony. Techniques that violated basic cooking principles yet produced described results that made people weep with longing upon waking. By spring of 1943, Helena had compiled over 200 dream recipes. But compilation was just the beginning. Driven by our obsession that her colleagues would later describe as consuming, Helena decided to attempt something unprecedented. She would try to recreate these dream dishes in reality. The challenge seemed impossible. How do you cook something that exists only in the subconscious mind? How do you source ingredients that may not exist in the waking world? Helena's solution was as brilliant as it was disturbing. She established Oneros in the basement of an abandoned apothecary shop on Neradova Street, using her medical knowledge to create what she called neurological seasoning. These were compounds derived from rare fungi, plant alkaloids, and substances she never fully disclosed, designed to trigger specific memory pathways in the brain while eating. The restaurant operated on a simple but eerie premise. Customers would arrive, often claiming they had no memory of making a reservation, and would be seated at one of only 6 tables. There was no menu. Instead, Helena would emerge from the kitchen, study each customer's face for several minutes, in complete silence, then return to prepare their meal. What she served defied description. Witnesses reported dishes that seemed to shift and change as they ate, flavors that triggered memories they didn't know they had, and textures that felt simultaneously familiar and impossible. One customer described eating soup that tasted like his childhood home smelled on Sunday mornings. Another claimed to have been served bread that carried the exact flavor of his grandmother's hands. But the most disturbing aspect wasn't the impossible food itself. It was what happened after eating it. Within hours of leaving Oneros, every customer experienced the same phenomenon. They would fall into the deepest sleep of their lives, and the dreams would begin. Not new dreams, but the exact dreams they had been having before visiting the restaurant, now returned with crystalline clarity and overwhelming intensity. Maria Svoboda, a seamstress who visited Onero's in June of 1943, left detailed diary entries describing her experience. She wrote of dreaming about a vast banquet hall where deceased family members served her dishes that tasted like specific moments from her childhood. Each bite brought back not just flavors, but entire sensory experiences. The sound of her father's laughter, the texture of her mother's dress, the exact temperature of summer evenings in her village. But Maria's dreams didn't stop there. Night after night, they expanded. The banquet hall grew larger, the deceased guests multiplied, and the meals became more elaborate. She began recognizing people in her dreams that she had never met in life, yet somehow knew intimately. They served her foods that didn't exist, yet satisfied hungers she didn't know she had. After her third visit to Onero's, Maria's diary entries became increasingly incoherent. She wrote of spending entire days in a waking dream state, unable to distinguish between her memories and her imagination. Her final entry, written in handwriting that deteriorated throughout the page, simply read, "The dreams are more real than this. The food there feeds something that's been starving all my life. I understand now why Helena keeps cooking. Some hungers can only be satisfied in sleep." Maria was found dead in her apartment a week later, apparently having died peacefully. In her sleep, her body showed signs of severe malnutrition despite neighbors reporting that she had been eating regularly. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure, but those who knew about Onero's understood what had really happened. Maria had chosen the dreams over reality, and her body had simply followed her mind into that impossible realm. The pattern repeated with increasing frequency throughout 1943. Customers would visit Onero's, experience the dream intensification, and gradually begin spending more time asleep than awake. Some would disappear entirely, their bodies found days later in peaceful death, always showing signs of starvation despite having eaten recently. But Helena continued cooking, driven by something beyond scientific curiosity or even obsession. Those who worked with her in the resistance reported that she had changed after establishing the restaurant. She rarely slept, barely ate regular food, and spoke constantly of feeding the part of people that regular meals could never reach. Dr. Franti Ek Novak, Helena's former colleague, attempted to intervene in the autumn of 1943. His notes, discovered decades later, described his final conversation with Helena as deeply disturbing. She had explained her theory that human consciousness existed simultaneously in multiple layers, and that conventional eating only satisfied the most superficial layer of hunger. According to Helena, the dream recipes she had collected weren't just random neural firing during sleep. They were messages from deeper layers of consciousness, instructions for feeding parts of the human experience that had been starving since birth. The neurological seasonings weren't just triggering memories, they were opening doorways between different levels of awareness. But Dr. Novak's notes revealed something even more unsettling. Helena claimed that the deeper her customers went into their dream states, the more clearly she could see their true hunger. And what she saw terrified even her. According to her final recorded statement, human beings weren't just physically hungry, they were existentially starving for experiences that the waking world could never provide. The dreams, she argued, weren't escapism. They were homecoming. By December of 1943. Onero's had gained a reputation, even among Prague's underground community, as a place of wonder and terror. Some sought it out desperately, claiming that regular food had lost all meaning. For them, others whispered warnings about the seamstress who had starved to death while sleeping, and the increasing number of customers who never seemed to wake up properly. But the strangest reports came from people who claimed to dream about Onero's without ever having visited it. They described detailed dreams of eating in Helena's restaurant, tasting impossible dishes, and waking with intense cravings for food that didn't exist. Some of these dreamers eventually found their way to Nerudova Street, claiming they had been guided there by their dreams. The end came suddenly in January of 1944. German authorities, investigating reports of unusual gatherings in the area, raided the basement restaurant. What they found has never been fully documented, but official reports mention finding disturbing materials of unknown origin and substances that defied chemical analysis. Helena Moravkova was arrested and transported to Terezin concentration camp, where she died 3 months later. Official records list the cause as typhus, but fellow prisoners reported that Helena simply stopped eating entirely upon arrival, claiming that regular food was no longer adequate for her needs. The basement space was sealed and later destroyed during Allied bombing. But the story should have ended there. Instead, something far stranger happened. Within weeks of Helena's death, people throughout Prague began reporting dreams about her, not just former customers, but individuals who had never heard of the restaurant. They described identical dreams of being served impossible meals by a woman who looked exactly like Helena, in a basement room that perfectly matched descriptions of the sealed restaurant. These dreams persisted for months, spreading beyond Prague to other cities, then other countries. Each dreamer reported the same experience, being served a meal that satisfied hungers they couldn't name, then waking with an overwhelming desire to find this place in reality. Some claimed to have found it. In the years following the war, reports surfaced from around the world of small, hidden restaurants that served impossible food to customers who couldn't remember choosing to eat there. Always operated by someone who claimed to have learned their techniques from dreams, always resulting in the same phenomenon of customers becoming lost between sleeping and waking. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. In 1978, construction workers renovating buildings on Neradova Street made an unexpected discovery. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement of the old apothecary shop, they found a small room that perfectly matched descriptions of an Aros, but the room had been sealed since 1944, making its existence impossible. Inside, they found Helena's complete collection of dream recipes, written in her handwriting but dated years after her death. The final entry, dated just 1 week before the discovery, read, "The dreams were never separate from reality. We were just looking at hunger from the wrong side. The restaurant exists wherever someone truly understands what they're starving for." The recipes continue to write themselves. The workers also found something else that challenged everything historians thought they knew about the case. Photographs, apparently taken in the basement room, showing Helena serving meals to customers. But the photographs were dated 1977, 33 years after Helena's death. In the images, Helena appears exactly as she did in 1943, unchanged by the decades. Her customers, however, are clearly from different time periods, their clothing and appearance spanning generations. All wear the same expression of desperate hunger being satisfied for the first time. The photographs were studied by experts who confirmed their authenticity while being unable to explain their existence. The paper was genuine 1970s stock. The developing techniques were consistent with the period, but the subjects included people who had been documented as dying decades earlier. Today, reports of restaurants matching Onero's description continue to surface worldwide, always in hidden locations, always serving impossible food to customers who don't remember choosing to be there, always operated by someone who claims to have learned their recipes from dreams of a woman who died in a concentration camp over 80 years ago. Food historians and neurologists have attempted to explain the phenomenon through various theories. Some suggest mass psychological conditioning, others point to the power of collective unconscious experiences during trauma. But none can explain the physical evidence, the sealed room that shouldn't exist, the photographs that document the impossible, or the continued reports from people who claim to have eaten meals that taste like dreams. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Onero story isn't what happened to Helena's customers, but what it suggests about the nature of human hunger itself. If Helena's theory was correct, if we are indeed starving for experiences that reality cannot provide, then what does that say about the fundamental nature of human existence? The customers who chose dreams over reality, who starved their bodies, while feeding something deeper, may have understood something that the rest of us refuse to acknowledge. that there are hungers which no earthly meal can satisfy, and desires that can only be fulfilled in the space between sleeping and waking. The recipes continue to surface. People still report dreams of eating impossible meals. And somewhere, in basements and hidden rooms around the world, restaurants may still be serving dishes that taste like the dreams you forgot you had. The question isn't whether Onaros existed. The evidence suggests it did, and continues to exist in ways that challenge our understanding of reality itself. The real question is whether you're brave enough to acknowledge your own impossible hungers, and what you would be willing to sacrifice to feed them. Because according to those who knew Helena Moravkova, she didn't discover something new about dreams and food. She simply remembered something that humans had forgotten, that we are creatures of appetite that extends far beyond the physical, and that sometimes the only way to truly satisfy that appetite is to stop distinguishing between what is real and what is possible the next time you wake from a dream of eating something that tasted impossibly perfect. Something that satisfied a hunger you didn't know you had. Remember Helena's restaurant. Remember that somewhere, someone might still be cooking those impossible meals, serving them to customers who understand that some forms of nourishment can only be found on the other side of consciousness. And if you find yourself walking down unfamiliar streets in a city you've never visited, drawn by the scent of food that reminds you of dreams you've forgotten, maybe you'll understand what Helena discovered in that basement in Prague, that the deepest hungers can only be fed by impossibility itself, and that sometimes the most nourishing meal is the one that challenges everything you thought you knew about what it means to be truly satisfied. The dreams, after all, are still writing the recipes. The question is whether you're hungry enough to taste what they're serving.